I was very influenced by Ground, not to look at magazines and overseas people and all. No, I wasn't really influenced by overseas people. No. So I've been working in an architect's office for 86 years. Well, from 1934 up till now. But they say, well, we can't believe it. What do you mean 86 years? You're 110. And I say, no, but I started when I was 7. Well, I was trained in the functional school, and we just believed that we had to use the modern materials that were available to us, and we had to let them express themselves, and we had to see that a building functioned. And of course the tragedy of those days is that function was just considered as physical function. It wasn't anything to do with how you actually felt. And the result was that we ignored how much energy we were going to use. We used far too much glass. We were using new materials that hadn't been used before, so our buildings leaked. It was a pretty difficult period. I started at the Melbourne Tech. It was called the Melbourne Tech in those days, it wasn't RMIT. Did 3 years there, and then I went to the Melbourne University Atelier, had a year at the Atelier, and then the final 2 years I did under Brian Lewis's new scheme. Boyd and Grounds were the people that influenced me most in those final 2 years. What they taught me more than anything else was to be inspired by architecture. Up till then it was a pretty dull sort of situation. I'd had a sort of a life as a child in my father's office, which was pretty dull, and then RMIT was pretty dull, but I got inspired when I met Boyd and Grounds. Grounds was very adamant that we shouldn't be looking at architectural magazines. I don't know why he was like that, but he was adamant that we should just be sort of inspired, get our own inspiration somehow or other. But he was quite adamant that we shouldn't sort of study overseas architects. Well, I think Grounds had an ego that was so large that it didn't actually fit into the studio, so we did a lot of work outside. So I think it was because of his ego that he had that attitude. I thought that geometrical period of his architectural career was derogatory to his career. I didn't think that worked. Any geometry that I have introduced is flown from the actual structure. Boyd was an entirely different man to Grounds. He was gentle, much more imaginative than Grounds. Grounds was earthy, and he would go to a job and he'd draw his details on a lump of 4x2. Boyd, on the other hand, would sit in the Age Small Home Service. He would have one of those telephones connected to his shoulder. He'd have his secretary, Grace Muir, taking down shorthand. So he'd be taking telephone calls, he'd be doing details on his drawing board, doing 4 things at once, and then I'd come up to him and say, there's a new Australian lady that wants to buy a house at such and such and wants this, that and the other, do you think we can do it? So he'd answer me, and take the telephone call, keep doing the detailed drawings and keep dictating to Grace Muir. Now Grounds wasn't like that at all. Grounds was, as I said, earthy and more sort of dominant. In a way, Boyd was gentle but incredibly imaginative. He was subtle. He would say things to you which you didn't quite get at first, and as you walked away you'd suddenly realise that what he said, what it meant. Our nickname for him was razor blades, because when you cut with a razor blade you don't actually feel the cut at first, but then 5 minutes later all the blood oozes out. He was like that, he was subtle. It was a marvellous period when Gropius came here. He went down to the McCutcheon house down at Mount Eliza. I remember he was very taken with the terrace houses. He loved the Australian terrace houses. Never been close to Harry. I don't think Harry liked my work at all, so I think that was the basis of why we weren't close. I was breaking his code, and that's why he didn't like me.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a modern house, but it's nothing like Boyer or Gropius. That's nothing like anything. I think it was because I didn't have the hang-ups that Seaside came in that background, and it was entrenched into him that this was the way to do things. You know, he was absolutely like a priest, you know, preaching, and any variation of it had to be destroyed. The first client I ever had, I had many in my father's office, but the one I actually got for myself, he inherited the block of land in North Balwyn, but he hated North Balwyn, he hated the suburbs. So he asked me to design a house for him where he wasn't looking at the suburbs. So I designed it so it was looking at the sky. So, and I was, even at that stage, I was into, because I'd been influenced by our last year in doing structures, I was introduced to post-tensioned and pre-tensioned reinforced concrete. I was interested into balancing forces. In the early 50s, there was a tremendous shortage of material, and everyone was looking at ways of designing buildings which reduced material. And the idea of counterbalancing forces, which ended up in the principle in the pool, was something that we could reduce the amount of material. So even in that first house that I did, the counterbalancing forces principle was used. It was a cantilever and balanced by a floor beside it. We won the pool in December '52, and in '52 I had designed the river house. The river house was that period of counterbalancing of forces and reduction of materials. And the river house had a situation of where the site was on the bend of a river, and the river was going to rise 40 feet. So it was going to be a platform somewhere up in the air. And the question was, how do you actually get it there? Conventionally, you'd have a series of 30-foot poles. That's what Grounds did over there in the triangular house, you know, on a steep site, and poles going down 30 feet. But I managed to work at a part of the site where I could take two cantilevers and they could balance each other. The river house was designed well before I ever did the Olympic pool design. It was very interesting because there's a book being published of Boyd's letters, and in that publication, it's going to come out, Miles Lewis is doing it. He's editing the letters. There's a sketch that Robert has done of the river house. I must have shown him the design of the river house, and he has sketched it in his letter, writing to Clerihan in New York. And that was predated the swimming pool design. So I was balancing forces before we ever got to that swimming pool design. So I've been doing quite a few designs on counterbalancing forces before we ever came to the pool. I first met Dione when she was a first-year student, and I put her in the review. She came down when she was doing fourth year and asked for a job, and we said, yeah, have a job. And what she did on the river house was to invent the colour scheme. She actually, the famous sketch of the river house with that colour, it was done by her.
I was experimenting with the colours and which way the red and yellow triangles were to be arranged. That was one of the sketches. And
tell them the story about when you asked me who's going to live in the house.
Oh yes, well, it goes back a bit further, doesn't it?
she was working on it, and she said to me, who's going to live in this house? Who's the house for? What are you planning to do? And I said to her, look, the office was down in St Kilda Road, backing on Faulkner Park, and I said to her, let's go out to the park, and I want to see you out there. So we walked through the office back to the park in the back, and we sat on a council seat, and I said to her, I'm going to ask you, will you marry me? And we both live in the house. And she said, yes, I'll marry you. And so I actually, when she was doing the colour scheme, I actually asked her to marry me. And on our 60th anniversary, we went back to the back of that park, and the seat is still there. And we sat on the seat, celebrated the 60 years of marriage with her. Yeah. But she's a great designer, and she designed a lot of buildings with me after that. We were a partnership. And even now, today, when I do something, we work together still.
The patterning on the facade was determined by the structure, obviously.
Yes, it just emphasises the structure. It just follows the bracing, the structure, and so forth. And we didn't quite realise how the effect that the colour would have. When we were doing it was in spring, and all the leaves were out, and the whole site was concealed. But if you look out the window now, you'll see there's not a single leaf on the thing. So we didn't understand that in winter, every leaf drops off, and you can see the thing from the bridge. And we were absolutely horrified because the tram used to stop, and people would all look, the tram stopped, they'd look and say, what is it? It's like something landed from Mars. Boyd loved the river house. Grounds loved the river house. The essence of the Olympic Pool design was, how do you make the cheapest possible construction? The competition conditions stressed that, and the form was literally given to you. The pools, sizes and location were fixed, 5,000 seats side beside them, so the form was given. So the question was, how do you construct this building in the most economical way? And because we had been working in relation to counterbalancing of forces coming from precast concrete, pre-stressed concrete and post-tension concrete, we started to use that principle. The first competition was the stadium at Carlton, and Grounds and Boyd asked us as students, Murphy, myself and Borland, we were all friends with them, they asked us to join them to do this competition at Carlton. The design that we produced was a very sensitive design in its geometry and things, but it wasn't an inspirational design. And I think Grounds must have sensed that, because before it was lodged, he pulled out of the team. Boyd was asked to be one of the judges for the Olympic pool. So Murphy and John Murphy, myself and Kevin were, Phyllis was pregnant at the time, 5 months pregnant, but we were left, we were the team that was just left. Boyd and Grounds had gone away because he thought the design for Carlton wasn't that good, and Boyd was appointed judge, so we were just left. So we started working on that design, and it came automatically, the idea of counterbalancing forces, because they actually gave you the form. I mean, there was a swimming pool, fixed dimensions. Beside it was a diving pool, fixed dimensions. So that was there. They wanted 5,000 seats looking at it, side by side. That was, so the form was actually given. You had to use that form. The question was, how did you build it? And they emphasized that it had to be, was the most economical way of constructing it. There's a huge amount of criticism in Melbourne for having the games, because we weren't putting in infrastructure for houses. Houses were being built on the edge of Melbourne without roads and without sewerage, and people were writing the paper saying, why are we spending money on Olympic Games when we should be providing accommodation for people coming back from the war? So reducing materials, the form given, here is the form, here is the pool. How are we going to reduce what's the most economical way of constructing this? Kevin's office and my office was in the basement of the building on the corner of Drummond Street and Victoria Street. And on the top floor, it was a terrace house. Top floor was Mockridge, Mitchell and Staley. Then there was John and Murray Daly, engineers, structural engineers, and we were down in a cellar. Kevin and I were in the cellar. And that's where the counterbalancing forces was looked at. And we used to have lunch with one of the employees of Murray Daly's office, Bill Owen. And he was absolutely wanting to help us. He thought, yes, this is a great idea. And without him, we couldn't have done it, because he did all the mathematics to show that we actually reduced the steel by 1/3 of the total tonnage. And Murray Daly, who was his boss, was saying, look, there's only one way to construct this. You take the columns supporting the seats 2/3 up the span, and then you arch across, and this will give you the most thing. We reduced that normal structural design by 1/3. And we put in when we put the submission in, we put the computations in. Now, this is a very unusual thing to an architectural competition, to actually submit the structural computations. But we knew that Professor Francis, Professor of Engineering, was on the judging panel, and we reckoned that he would understand what we've done, and he did. He went through the computations, and he told the others on the thing. He said, "This is a brilliant design." And they said, "You're sure it'll stand up?" He said, "Yes, it'll stand." Well, he said, "Not only will it stand up," he said, "but if it fails, it'll spring up in the air, fly away." So that's the background of how we did that pool. And it really, therefore, it came from our final year in structures. Murphy and myself were in the final year. Borland wasn't in it, but in that final year in structures, we were fascinated with the principle of stressing pre-stressed concrete and post-tension concrete. Post-tension, where you put the tension into it after it's constructed, and pre-tension before. And very interesting to know whether the Olympic swimming pool is a pre-stressed structure or a post-stress structure. I've always designed it as a high tensile steel post-tension structure, because we erected the girders for the seats propped up, and then we hoisted the truss up, and then connected the truss to the girders, so that we were tensioning it after we'd put it in. But you could almost conceive that as pre-tension. I'll never forget the design of the coil house. It was designed for a family called Snellman, and he was a Dutchman who'd come from Indonesia just during the war. And they had this block of land in Heidelberg, in King Street, Heidelberg. And I was interested in using precast concrete. There were sort of precast concrete small blocks that were there, and I designed this house based on precast concrete. And I made a model of it. And they were living in a flat in East Melbourne, and I took the model along to their flat and showed them the model. I was very proud of it. And I'd come to the site by tram, and they didn't like the design at all. And I said to them, "Well, look, don't worry. If you don't like it, I'll design something else for you, and I'll bring it tomorrow." And then I left the flat, and I walked over, and I was standing at the tram stop, and it started raining. I'll never forget it. It's because I saw the model actually disappear in the rain in front of me. And I went back to the home or office, I don't know where I did, and there was a huge tree. I decided to design the house around the tree. So it was just designed in night. I went back the next day and showed them the design of the house going down the tree, and they accepted it, they liked it. So that's how I saved the job. The Mill Hospital was designed after we'd won the pool, and I designed it down in the office in St Kilda Road. Again, it was the counterbalancing of forces. The site was a unique sort of site. A brutal sort of weather in Beulah. It was dust storms because the Melly was eroding, and intense heat, lack of water, and because of the heat, you know, the foundations of how buildings, the tremendous earth movement in things. So all these things meant I had to sort of find a way of saving all the water. It became a job that was it was like a pioneer job from the point of view of environmentally facing up to the rigour of the thing, because I made all sorts of passive systems to keep it cool. There was no labour you couldn't get a builder in Beulah. Where could you get a builder to build it? So I had to sort of design it prefabricated. So it was prefabricated. It was a steel frame, the central water tank. It was in two parts and was a steel, it acted as a structural steel column, and the steel girders radiated out. The steel was fabricated in Melbourne. So the steel was all brought up to the site, fabricated, so the whole structure was erected in steel. The radiating girders were held by cables, that's where the reversal, the counterbalancing of forces came in, because the latter part of the girders were cantilevered, and then I applied louvers to those cables, so the whole roof was in shelter. The whole roof was caved in, so radiating into the column, so every bit of water that ever fell on the roof went into the column. The top of the steel column had a windmill on it, so that it pumped the water from the lowest part of the tank up to the upper part of the tank. So it was gravity feed water to the rest of the hospital. It was an inner courtyard, so getting away from the dust storm, so the whole circular hospital operated into the thing. The Star House, that's the Brunt House over in Studley Park. I was trying to get feelings into the spaces of the house. It was facing west. The reason why it has this serrated thing, it was facing west, looking on the river and the golf course. Well, the plan shape emanated from taking the western facade, front face, and breaking up the facade, which gave me the basic shape, and then the rest of the house flowed around it. It flowed back into the rest of the site. That's how I got the shape. I'll never forget when Boyd and his wife Patricia came out to the Brunt House, which we were just talking about. She walked through it and she said, "This is the greatest thing since sex." So it was her description of it. Well, Robin was devoting his life to trying to influence the public. He would do absolutely everything he could. He'd write articles, he'd give lectures, he would appear on radio interviews. He had a marvellous strip in The Age where he'd write every Monday for The Age, for the small home service. And in 1956, it was just the beginning of television, and he was very friendly with Hector Crawford, and we invented a machine, a winding machine, that we would draw on long strips of paper and wind it past the camera for television. All sorts of things like this we were doing. And we started making films together in the Architects Review. My first Architects Review was 1948, and he was tutoring, and I asked him to start writing some verses and things for the reviews, which he did. Back in the early 50s, Robin and I made this film called Your House and Mine with Eric Kerr, cameraman, and we just used to shoot it in the weekends when we weren't working, and we'd just take shots here and there and put it together. We had roughly a script when we started, and we used a guy called Horton from the ABC to do the over voice. We thought that the film would be able to be, we had great aspirations for the film, but it didn't actually, it wasn't used for television, for example. We thought it might have been able to be used, but it wasn't. But we eventually, what happened after making films was we decided to get into planning. We decided that the houses and things we were doing and the articles and the writing and the things we were doing weren't influencing enough. So we thought that we'll try to get into planning, and we had an international architectural conference here in Melbourne and we went to Dick Hamer, who was Premier, and we asked him if we could take a town, some chunk of land, and design a satellite town. Boyd died on a Friday night, and the conference started on the Saturday morning. And from there, I kept going into planning. I ended up working in the Melbourne Strategy Plan, and we tried to influence Melbourne at that level. I'd like to go skiing.
Yeah.
I'm going to go as soon as Toby asks some questions.
Pretty great.
That was great.
Yeah, well,